There we go. So now we're recording and we're live with Adrian Lucas. Very nice to catch up with you, Adrian. We've known each other for quite a while.
Yeah. We went back. I think I met you. You had some gatherings at your place in London, didn't you? Back, what, 20 years ago? Or is it more than?
I think it's probably more than 20 years. But let's call it just about 20 years.
Yeah.
Great. And I suppose now would be a great time we can share with viewers about how you got into building.
Well, it all began going into a music shop in Lincoln, where I live, seeing a poster for an evening class in guitar making. So I was immediately very interested. Up to that point, I was a guitar player and quite obsessive about playing the guitar. I got into woodwork through doing joinery on houses with my father. And I'd also studied a degree in architecture. So there was this whole design structure thing going on as well. So it's kind of like those three elements all came together. So anyway, I went along to the evening class. It was a classical guitar evening class, which was not really my thing, but I thought, I'm going to learn something useful. And I'd rather learn to make a classical guitar than not learn to make a guitar. And the class was run by Roy Cornell, who at the time was, he was surveying a few of the classical guitars, the really well-known makers, through a dealer that we knew in Lincoln, who was having these guitars pass through and was inviting Roy to survey them. And that turned into a book on classical guitar making. And because of my architectural background, Roy asked me to do the drawings for that book. And it was kind of, while I was building this first guitar, I was plunged into this world of the classical guitar makers and the whole history and all the techniques and everything. So it was kind of crash course in the theory while I was trying to play catch up with building my first guitar. And I did that for a while. I then made an electric guitar at the class, which was a bit of a strange one because Roy didn't really know what to do with me as far as that went. So I just did my own thing and built this kind of semi-hollow body electric guitar using more or less classical building techniques, which kind of sounds a bit odd.
That's one way to do it.
Yeah, but that was kind of me using the techniques I was learning and kind of turning in a direction that I was more interested in.
Yeah, of course.
And I did the class for a couple of years, 2.5 years or something, and then I kind of felt that I knew enough to carry on my own. I'd set up a workshop in the roof of my house, and I got going. I hooked up with a local classical guitarist called Rob Johns, and he was very good at giving me feedback on the classical guitars I was building and also finding buyers for them at that time among his students. So I was actually, although it hadn't been my area of interest, I was making a lot of classical guitars at the beginning. Roy finished teaching that night class after about, I don't know, 4 or 5 years and went off to Newark to set up the course there and invited me to take over the evening class, which I did. So I was then teaching some of the people who'd been studying alongside me at the beginning. And that was the beginning of my involvement in teaching guitar making as well.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you there, Adrian. We just had a little bit of a cutout. You sort of mentioned that Roy had moved to Newark and had set up the course there, and he had invited you to teach. Would you mind just repeating that? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. Roy was offered the chance to start a guitar making course over at Newark College, which was a full-time course. And he left the evening class and asked me if I wanted to take it on. which I did. So that was the beginning of my teaching, my involvement in teaching guitar making. And I was teaching some of the people who had been on the course when I was still a student on the course. So I was kind of, I was learning on the job. I was learning how to teach, but I was probably only one step ahead of the students as well.
Right.
But I think teaching is a very valuable thing to do, because you have to kind of deconstruct what you know, especially when you've learnt stuff in a fairly organic way, and you have to deconstruct it in order to teach it to other people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you're still teaching there to date, I understand.
Well, yeah, it was what happened. I did the evening class for a few years. Then Roy, they'd set up an electric guitar making course at Newark and wanted another tutor. And Roy actually said, "Do you want to teach this? You've made a few electric guitars." And I did that for 3 years in Newark. I taught electric guitar making, which was another fast learning curve, because when I took the job on, I'd only made 3 or 4 electric guitars, I think. So again, I was kind of flying by the seat of my pants. And then I gave that up. And about 4 or 5 years later, again following Roy finally decided he'd been at Newark long enough and wanted to move on, and invited me to take on his job there. This was about 2008. And I did. I took over there, and I'm still there. I'm just doing 1 day a week these days at Newark, and it's now a degree course in guitar making. And it's just really nice to get out of my workshop 1 day a week, mix with people who are very fired up and motivated about guitar making, and I really enjoy the kind of design side of it and discussing designs that people have come up with and how to realize that in a practical way. So it's almost like a laboratory, the shop at Newark. It's a kind of where people really explore, and I kind of help them with that and explore with them. It's not so much me imparting my knowledge as it is, but it's more me helping them to sort of get into the mindset of how do we make this idea into a reality. And with the experience I've got, I can guide them through what might work and what might not work. So it's a very stimulating thing to do. And of course, students come from all different backgrounds, so it's a two-way thing. You do pick up a lot of inspiration and good ideas from things that students bring to the table as well.
Great. Thank you for that. Maybe I'm quite familiar with your instruments, and I understand. And if I'm not wrong, you're still building with the Spanish heel construction technique.
That's right. Yeah. Again, this was really a hangover from my classical guitar training, where the Spanish heel is pretty much standard. When the first time I got asked to build a steel string acoustic guitar, I adapted what I knew about classical making. And these days, that makes a lot of sense to me. I've actually got a neck here. This is a steel string neck. And you can see this is my current version of the Spanish heel. And you can see this is the traditional slipper foot. This glues onto the soundboard right up to the transverse bar above the sound hole. And in that way, the whole neck is locked into not only the sides, but the top and the back as well. So it's a very, it's a structure with a lot of integrity. And I think it's very stable.
Right. I suppose one of the comments that we always get when there's a Spanish heel involved is, how do you reset the neck? I think has always been one of the concerns.
Yeah, I've come across that question quite a lot. I think the first thing to say is, I think it makes the structure very stable, and therefore there's less likely to be a need for a reset. The oldest steel string guitar that of mine that's made with that method is about 25 years old, and I've seen that guitar recently, and it's very stable. There's no movement in that. But having said that, if you needed to reset the neck, it's possible. You can remove the binding from the heel to the edges of the upper bout, and you could unglue the back from the slipper heel. You could unglue the back on this bit and change the angle, and then re-glue it. So it's not an easy job, but it can be done. And I think for the kind of structural integrity that I think I achieve from using it, it seems a small trade-off that one day in several decades' time, you might need to just slip the back to change the neck angle.
Sorry, I'm chuckling to myself because you say slip the back, as if, oh yeah, I just slip back. It's actually quite challenging from what I've seen.
It's true, but then any neck reset on a dovetail is quite challenging as well. I did a couple of those on a couple of old Martins last year, and it's quite a difficult job. So yeah, I mean, you're right, but for me, in my experience, it makes a very stable instrument, and that's the trade, if you like. Not only structurally stable, so it's not going to move against the body, but also if you look at that, you've got the fingerboard is glued to the same piece of wood right up to the end. I mean, the fingerboard will end about here, which means A, you can hammer the frets in over the body, and B, you've got a straight line. You're not going to get a change of angle where the neck meets the body at the point, which is a common thing on guitars with the separate end block. It doesn't have that extension. I know some people who make a separate end block will now put that kind of tongue in as part of the end block, which seems like a good idea.
Yeah, because it gives the top a little bit more support over that area.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it you know, if you've got an end block that's vertical with end grain here and end grain here, it's not good really to have end grain glued to the top and the back. It's not a good connection in terms of preventing that block from rotating. And I think just the fact that you've got this continuity of wood right through is a really strong point, not just for the structure, but also for the sound. You've got that continuity of resonance through from one end of the neck to the sound hole, basically.
Right. Yeah. I can understand that. Well, and I suppose, having explored a little bit about the Spanish heel, maybe we can catch up a little bit about what you're working on lately.
Right. Okay. Well, in the last couple of years, I've done some pretty interesting stuff. A couple of years ago, I made an upright electric bass for the first time, which is like a double bass, but obviously without the acoustic body. And that was something very new and different to me, and very interesting project. I've also done in the last couple of years a 5-string fretless bass, a few ukuleles. I did a lap steel guitar for Tom Doughty. I think you know Tom.
Yes, I do know.
And that was you know, it wasn't just a straightforward one. Again, it had to be designed from the bottom up because Tom has quite an interesting style whereby he needed a cutaway on the bass side of the instrument, and it was also a short scale, so it was a kind of scaled down version of Weissenborn type thing. I've been making some of my regular guitars, but always with a twist in them. I made last year I did a Terz guitar, which is like it's a short scale guitar that's generally tuned up by a minor third. So it gives a high voice, basically. That was also, it was a fan fret instrument. And in order to, because the body was small, I compensated that for making it deep. And a sort of dreadnought depth in order to give it some bottom end. And to offset the depth, I put a wedge on the body. So it's quite a few unusual features in that, and it worked very well. It had a really good bass kick, and currently I'm building something similar. You see this soundboard on the wall. That's for a fan fretted guitar, which is also got a wedge body, but again, it's a smallish body with quite a lot of depth in order to maintain the bass end of it. And something I've been doing over the last 5 years is laminating the sides. And again, I've got some sides here that have just come out in the mold. That's two pieces of wood laminated together. So I've got Indian rosewood on the inside, Dalbergia Granadillo on the outside. And that makes for a pretty rigid, it's pretty rigid. It's a little bit, it's thicker than a standard side, probably closer to 3.5 millimeters than the standard 2 millimeters. And that gives a really stiff rim to the whole, you know, I think of the front as being like a diaphragm, like a drum head.
Right.
And the edge. What you don't want to do is lose energy from that resonating diaphragm into the sides with them flexing.
Right.
So by making the sides pretty rigid, like with a drum, you're getting more of the energy staying in the soundboard and coming out as sound. So that's pretty much my standard procedure now, to do the doubled up sides. This is another fan fretted guitar that I'm building currently, with the deeper body than standard. So I have sort of 3 basic acoustic models, but I rarely build the same guitar twice. There's always some little twist somewhere, and keeps it interesting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I can appreciate that. Well, thank you very much for your time. It's been great catching up. I think we'll probably arrange another catch up as the guitar sort of approaches completion, and we can see a little bit more of it. But otherwise, I suppose the very last thing is to say, if anybody was interested in getting one of your guitars, how would they go about it?
Well, I have a website, which is www.lucasguitars.co.uk. Don't make the mistake of .com. lucasguitars.com is somebody else. So it's .co.uk. I have a Facebook page, Adrian Lucas Facebook page, and an Instagram account, AJ Lucas Guitars. So any of those will find me.
Great. That's fabulous. Well, thank you again very much. Thank you very much again, excuse me, for taking the time to chat, and we'll catch up soon.
Yeah, thank you. It's been good to speak to you.
Cheers. Take care.
Okay. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye. Okay, bye-bye.